This episode of Around the Oval is brought to you by Todd Pennington with Revolution Mortgage. Hey, Ohio State fans, welcome back to another edition of Around the Oval brought to you by Todd Pennington with Revolution Mortgage. I'm Alex Gleitman here from Buckeye Scoop. And this week with Ohio State going to Champaign to play Illinois, we bring in Jeremy Werner of Illini Inquirer. Jeremy, thanks for joining the show. How's everything going?
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate it. It's a busy time, actually. All those months where we didn't have much, and now Illinois' football continues to go, and we got 3 basketball games in 3 days for a top 10 Illinois basketball team. So all of a sudden we're busy, but it's nice to see.
Yeah, normally you kind of be, I don't want to say complaining about that, but as you said, you don't take anything for granted this year, especially the way, Illinois season football wise has gone with some COVID issues. It's incredible that they've been able to play through, and now, you got a flurry of activity going your way. Speaking of Illinois season, it's been interesting thus far. I mean, 5 games in, they are 2-3. They started the season 0-3, a big 45-7 loss to Wisconsin. I think everyone saw that one on national TV. Graham Mertz's premature coming out party, I'd say, and then a close one to Purdue. You can't fault them for that. And then they kind of got blown out by a Minnesota team that's not that good. But, I know they had some COVID issues during that time. They bounced back 2 weeks ago against Rutgers, still without, Brandon Peters in a Isaiah Williams run heavy offensive attack. And then last week as 15.5-point underdogs, they come out and they just dominate Nebraska, beat them by 18 points, 41-23. So, you're the expert on Illinois. I just see the scores. I watched them a little bit on TV. What do you think about, this program so far this year? Who are they really? Are they the 0-3 team? Are they the 2-0 team? Are they somewhere in between? What's your thoughts on this Lovie Smith program?
Yeah, Alex, you called me the expert, and I'm here to say I have no idea because we really haven't seen the real team that much. We saw most of the team against Wisconsin. We saw most of the team against Nebraska, and those 2 games couldn't be any more different. I mean, they had all offseason, the long offseason to prepare for Wisconsin. Now, they didn't know about them until about a month before, but still, they had all those weeks to prepare for Wisconsin, and they had talked all season how they were better, how this was the best Lovie Smith Illinois team. And I agree with him. It's the best roster he has, and I think it's a roster that's middle of the pack in the Big Ten West. And then to come out and drop an head like that, both offensively and defensively, to look totally incompetent, really left a bad taste in their mouth. And then, of course, you said the COVID issues. Now, I will say they've only had 2 players during the season test positive, but one of those happened to be their starting quarterback in Brandon Peters. And then they missed several players who are roommates of Brandon Peters and Griffin Moore due to contact tracing. So the COVID problems have mostly been contact tracing, but I will say Illinois has done a nice job of not allowing a couple positive tests to, balloon into what we've seen at Maryland, obviously at Wisconsin early in the season. So they still played these games, and in the long run, that really hurts their record, right? If you didn't play those 2 games against Minnesota and Purdue, you might feel better about where Illinois is, but those 2 games count. And Purdue, I thought defensively they were okay, but offensively behind Karan Taylor, they had 4 turnovers. He's their 4th-string quarterback. And then against Minnesota, they just got shellacked. And I think that's the game that you really didn't feel good about. It's like, okay, your entire defense is there. You have a backup quarterback, but he played decently against Purdue. Why aren't you more competitive against a bad Minnesota team? I think they're lower half of the Big Ten and not very good this year, like you said, even though they were able to beat Purdue. So that was the disappointment. And then you head to Rutgers and you get down 20-10. And just like last year, when they got down against Wisconsin and looking at 0-4 starting the Big Ten, people are like, Lovie Smith might be done here. They find a way to win behind Isaiah Williams, their backup, top 200 prospect who Ohio State was looking at as a wide receiver, and he leads them to a victory. And then Nebraska, they were dominant. It's the most dominant victory we've seen for Illinois in 2 years in the Big Ten. And even though Nebraska is not very good, that's a team that Illinois has struggled to beat. So that was the first look we got at them, mostly full strength, and it was pretty dominant. But now, how do you kind of evaluate the rest of this? Because you got Ohio State, the best Big Ten team coming into town. I think if Illinois is competitive, you're starting to see, or hangs around into the fourth quarter, then you might be like, okay, this team can turn it around. But they have the third toughest schedule left in the country because they got Iowa the week after, Northwestern, who's 5-0. So if Illinois finds a way to be competitive in these last 3 games, maybe steal one of these as an underdog, and then maybe find a way to get another win in that crossover game, I think Illinois fans aren't happy because it's an under 500 record when they expected to be better than that this year. But I think they're starting to show, at least in that Nebraska game, that maybe COVID is a big reason for the disappointment so far this year. Because at this point of the season, Illinois fans are probably hoping for 3-2 or 4-1, realistically too, rather than 2-3 at this point.
Yeah, that makes sense. You know, I'm glad that they have all their pieces back. It's good to see. You know, I'm a Lovie Smith fan. I hope he does well. He just seems like such a great guy. And he's built a good staff there, and he's definitely taken Illinois from a really bad place and at least made them a respectable program again. So,
yeah, you know, from the outside, Alex, a lot of people would say Illinois 2-3 is probably successful, right? Like I think some people would say if Illinois is not the worst team in the Big Ten, that's a success. But they have to. I mean, Tier 5 for Lovie Smith, right? And you're seeing what Tom Allen's doing at Indiana. You're seeing what Jeff Brom has done at Purdue to make that a middle of the pack Big Ten team, to see what Minnesota did with PJ Fleck last year. Illini fans should want more. And that's the hard part right now is how do you evaluate this season with the COVID losses they've had? And it did make an impact. So I think realistically, after finishing 4th in the Big Ten last year, or Big Ten West last year, Illinois fans had higher expectations than the outside. Inside, they had higher expectations. And that's why to start off 0-3, a lot of people are jumping off saying, hey, we got to be better than this. And I think that's right. I think they should put pressure that even though fans outside of Illinois in the Big Ten think, hey, if they just win a couple games every year, that's a success. Now, Illinois needs to strive to be better than the doormat in the Big Ten West. So that's what the rest of this year, I think, is proving. Whether it shows up with 4 wins at the end of the year, 5 wins, or 3 wins, it's about not being a pushover anymore.
And no doubt. I mean, look, I was in the horseshoe when Juice Williams came in and stomped on the block O, and, you know, Illinois upset Ohio State, went on to the Rose Bowl. You know, there's no reason why they can't be an Iowa, you know, maybe 7 to 9 win season regularly with, you know, the occasional, we win the West, we have a shot to win the Big Ten. Maybe we go to the Rose Bowl. So, you know, I hear you 1,000%. Let's focus on this year's team though. I mean, as you said, it's hard to get a read on them, but when you talk about the offense, tell me a little bit about the strengths and weaknesses of that unit. Who are some of the players that Ohio State fans need to know about this weekend?
Yeah, Illinois kind of got back to running the football extremely well. This is actually a battle of the top 2 rushing offenses in the Big Ten, believe it or not, with Ohio State and Illinois. And Rod Smith, who's the offensive coordinator, comes from the Rich Rodriguez tree. So I know you know what he did in Michigan, and you kind of know what offense to kind of go for. But it's a spread scheme, likes to get players out in space, but it will run the quarterback. And they've done a pretty good job. Isaiah Williams is a way different quarterback than Brandon Peters, but the last couple of weeks they've run the football effectively with both those guys. And Brandon Peters is the straw that stirs the drink. And there were some questions here last week, understandably so. I mean, Isaiah Williams ran for a school program quarterback record, 192 yards in that win against Rutgers in his first career start. So you saw that they had a thing with him, right? They have an identity where they can run the football. But even before Brandon went out with COVID, I wrote a column that they need to treat him like a dual threat quarterback because in his 3 previous games, he'd run for 210 yards. This is kind of the guy that went to Jim Harbaugh and everyone knows is this kind of pocket passer, the Stanford prototype of what the NFL is looking for. Big arm, big body, but doesn't move well. He's a good athlete. And he can make you pay when you don't account for him. If the defensive ends crash on the running backs, Brandon Peters will make you pay. So that's played well. It's opened up some things for the running backs, Chase Brown and Mike Epstein, who are really solid Big Ten running backs who can break off some long runs. They've had a few long runs the last couple of games, but those guys each have had 100-yard rushing days the last couple of weeks. And then the passing game is where Peters really comes in hand. Because Illinois has not passed the ball well the last couple of years, including with Peters. Before last game, he was under 50% during Big Ten games in completion rate, but he finally got some one-on-one battles last week, and he made Nebraska pay for it. Josh Amatorbebe is a great target on the outside, big physical, not that fast, but he's a guy that when he gets one-on-one, even against some of these Ohio State defensive backs, he turns 50-50 balls into more like 80-20 balls. They're a big physical group of wide receivers. Their tight ends are pretty good. Daniel Barker is really good in the seam. Luke Ford's a former top 100 prospect that really hasn't gotten going in the passing game, but it's kind of a big physical group, not what you'd expect out of like a lower level Big Ten team, but they have a good offensive line who's got a couple pros up front, including Kendrick Green and their guard, who's really good. Vidarian Lowe's been pretty good for them as well. So it's a big physical group. I don't know how that'll play against Ohio State, but they like to run the football. They got some big wide receivers and tight ends who can help move the chains, but it all depends on quarterback play to get those guys all involved because they don't have a lot of speed, I would say, on offense. They don't have a lot of game breakers outside their running back. So they're going to have to move the ball effectively down the field with some key throws from Brandon Peters.
Yeah, for sure. And, the Ohio State secondary has been a point of weakness for the team this year. They got absolutely destroyed last week through the air against Indiana in the second half after racing out to a 35-7 lead. Rutgers was more of trick plays. That's kind of the way they scored on them. It was a little different, but Penn State had a lot of success too, throwing the ball. So, I think that's definitely something to watch. How successful is Brandon Peters throwing the ball through the air against Ohio State? Ohio State's working on some things, personnel, scheme adjustments, things like that this week in practice. They have to figure that out over the next 3 games against Illinois, Michigan State, and Michigan before a potential Big Ten championship game. So it will be interesting to see, how that kind of matchup goes of the Illinois air attack against the Ohio State secondary. But switching gears to the defense, Ohio State, one of the best offenses in the country. Ohio State fans will sit here and say, our running game, it just doesn't look right and things like that. I think last week they got off to a good start. And as you said, it's the top 2 rushing teams in the Big Ten. They're putting up 600 yards of offense, 40 plus points almost every single week. And Ohio State fans are still complaining, which I think is a little ridiculous, but
it's interesting, the relative, like it's all how you look at it, right?
Yeah.
College football can, playoff contender, national title or bust. It's amazing the things you'll nitpick about. And I get it from Ohio State fans, but to think their rushing attack isn't quite right and it's number 1 in the Big Ten, right? Or that, hey, they gave up 35 points to a top 10 Indiana team. Like, I get why that's a concern if you're going to go up against the Clemson, but it's just all relative. It's just my point of view from Shane.
Yeah, for sure. And I think Ohio State fans will admit that we're measuring against, Clemson and Alabama and Notre Dame, and can they win the Big Ten? They shouldn't assume that, but it's once they get out of the Big Ten, are they going to be embarrassed again, or can they actually get over the hump? It's going to be interesting to see this offense. Justin Fields did not have a good day against Indiana last week. Maybe gave Illinois some looks at some things with zone blitzes and whatnot that they can throw at him to try to confuse him a little bit. As I said, the running game I think the interior offensive line for Ohio State has not been as good as they thought it may be. Wyatt Davis, a little slow start. Josh Myers has not been the player he was last year. And Harry Miller's a first-time starter at left guard. And I think that's led to some struggles. So, Jeremy, Illinois defense, tell us about it. What kind of style they play? What's their strengths and weaknesses? Who are some players to watch on that side of the ball?
It's a Lovie Smith defense. And if you watch Chicago Bears football all those years, what's the number 1 thing for them? It's taking the ball away. That is everything for Illinois. And I do think Indiana gave them a little bit of hope that they can hang around in this game because they were able to pick off Justin Fields, I believe, 3 times in that game. When Illinois takes the ball away the last 2 years, they usually win. When they win the turnover margin, they're 7-3 now the last 2 years, including, I believe it's 6-3 in the Big Ten when they win the turnover margin. When they don't, they're 0-7. And they're really good at it. The last 2 years, they've been one of the top 5 teams in takeaways. They had 6 defensive touchdowns last year. The last 80 minutes of football, Illinois is 8-0 in the turnover margin. So they're awesome at punching the ball away. That's how they won against Wisconsin. They forced 2 fumbles on Jonathan Taylor late in that game and were able to set up their offense with some key drives. Jake Hansen is one of the best in the country. I think he's 9 forced fumbles in the last 14 games to go along with a couple interceptions, couple fumble recoveries. Kalen Tolson, a linebacker who's really, really good at it. So that's what they do. Now, between the goal lines, Illinois hasn't been that good. They've busted a lot in the secondary early in the season. They've been better the last couple of weeks, but they've gone against Rutgers and Nebraska. 2 of the worst quarterback situations, I believe, in the Big Ten. Now they're going up against the top 5 pick in Justin Fields and 2 ridiculous wide receivers and a host of ridiculous wide receivers that Ohio State has. And then their running defense actually has been a little bit better than we expected. They had to replace a lot of players, all 4 starters on the defensive line. But Roderick Perry, a South Carolina State graduate transfer, has looked like an NFL prospect and has been pretty good. They got a couple of veterans up front, Owen Carney, Isaiah Gay, who have been solid for them. But it's a back 7 that's going to have to force a lot of takeaways. The good news is they're good at it. The bad part is they are less athletic and less fast than everybody they're going against Ohio State. So Illinois played pretty well defensively against Nebraska, pretty well defensively against Rutgers, most of that with takeaways. I would expect Ohio State to top 500 yards in this game pretty easily just because of their weapons. But it's, can they force 3 or 4 takeaways to have a chance to win this game? Illinois did it last year against Wisconsin, a top 10 team. They're going to have to do it against Ohio State this year to even have a chance.
Yeah. And, I think a big key to a lot of games this year has been injury status report. To your point, Illinois may have, they're 2-3. They might have 2 more wins on their schedule, at least 1 more win, if they didn't have to deal with some of the COVID and contact tracing issues and things like that. Ohio State is struggling a little bit in the secondary because of a key injury to Cameron Brown, who is one of their top cornerbacks this year. He's out for the year with an Achilles injury. We saw Indiana last week have a left tackle and key defensive lineman out. It goes on and on. What's the injury report? We could call it even COVID status outlook of Illinois heading into this week. Any key players to watch of potentially not playing?
As we all know, the COVID thing could change by the day, but Illinois, since Brandon Peters, has not had another player test positive that we know of, that has been out for 3 weeks, right? They are missing a few key players due to injury. Right tackle Alex Palczewski is an NFL prospect, probably a guard at the NFL if he gets there. But he's started 40 straight games for Illinois before suffering a serious knee injury. He's out for this week, likely out for the season with we think it's probably an ACL, but Lovie hasn't confirmed that. One of their linebackers, Treek Barnes, who played well against Wisconsin, he suffered an ankle injury last week. We don't know how long he'll be out, but he's likely out. So that means another linebacker's been out the last couple of weeks, Milo Eifler, who's a Washington transfer, former 4-star prospect, pretty good athlete, but hasn't played all that well this year. And then defensive end Keith Randolph's a rotational player, just a redshirt freshman who's a top 700 prospect, pretty good talent. He could be out as well, but it's not a huge list for Illinois. They're probably as healthy and as complete of a roster as they've had since week 1 against Wisconsin. So whatever their best is, and we'll find out on Saturday, I think Illinois basically has the best roster it's had since week 2.
And, now last thing here, Ohio State enters this game, 28-point favorites on the road. It's going to be interesting. Ohio State's been, they were a 20.5-point favorite against Indiana. They were, I forget what it was against Rutgers. It was pretty high. It was in the high 30s. Penn State, they were pretty, I think almost 3 touchdown favorites there. And they haven't been able to cover those spreads. They haven't played a full dominant 60 minutes of football. How do you see this one playing out on Saturday? How do you think the game's going to go? What's your final score prediction?
Yeah, I expect Ohio State to win this game pretty handily. Now, I will say Illinois is a veteran team, right? And they've pulled off some upsets. I mean, last week, everyone had them as a huge underdog to a 1-win Nebraska team, and they dominated. Nebraska. And I know Ohio State did too, but that's a common opponent they have, and they both played those teams pretty well. So Illinois is confident coming into this game, and they're a veteran team that was able to do some things last year that Illinois teams haven't done in a long time. Beating Wisconsin as a 31-point underdog gives them a little confidence going into this game. Maybe not that they'll win, but they're worthy opponent and that they can hang around and make it interesting. Michigan State, they were down 21 points last year at Michigan State, came back and won that game. I know Michigan State wasn't great, but that was a way better program than Illinois for years. So there's a little bit of confidence there, but they have to play their A-plus game, right, to beat a team like Ohio State. Now, I think if they play their A- game, like maybe they did against Nebraska, that they can make this interesting going in the fourth quarter. A couple of years ago, they were up on a top 10 Penn State team at home in the third quarter. Then they got wiped over the last 20 minutes with a great Penn State team at that time. But Illinois has had a history here recently of hanging around a little bit with teams like this. But listen, Justin Fields, you guys know how good these Ohio State players are compared to Illinois. The recruiting rankings show it. Ohio State's second string would probably be favored against Illinois. So I would imagine Ohio State wins this by 20 plus points and has a good shot at covering the spread. But it is an interesting Illinois team because, like you said, I don't quite know what they are yet, but the most recent looks we've had at them is the best looks they've had. And it's a team that has enough talent to be a middle of the pack Big Ten team. So I don't know if they could be a team that Ohio State just wipes if you're a national title contender, but it's a team that might hang around a little bit longer than people think.
Well, we're excited to see what happens on Saturday. Jeremy, thanks for joining the show. You guys can follow him on Twitter at jwerner247 and check out his great stuff there, as well as online, Illini Inquirer, Illinois.247sports.com. Jeremy, thanks for joining the show. Have a great Thanksgiving and looking forward to watching the game on Saturday.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Have fun watching the game on Saturday.